Good morning, boker tov, bonjour, sabah al khair, and what else? Our languages are represented here. Shalom aleichem, of course. And welcome to the last day of our conference, which I can see that you have the relief expression on your faces. So it means that our discussions were very fruitful and provided a lot of new ideas. So we are going just to very briefly, in 20 minutes maybe, to wrap up the conference and discuss what are our ideas, what are the fields of work that are worth exploring, and also maybe come up, if not now, then later. We are very open, and our academic committee may become standing academic committee for the JICH conferences. So we will follow up with many more. So you will hear about some ideas. I just would like to thank our sponsors, which is again the Fortunow Archive of Yale University, Yeshiva University, and Polish Ministry of Culture and National Heritage. Thank you for providing funds for the conference, and we are very grateful for that. And I would like to invite all of you who are staying this evening at 6 p.m. We are going to have opening of a very extraordinary exhibition in our Jewish Historical Institute. These are works of our Polish artist Mieczysław Wejman, who was in hiding in 1944, and while he was in hiding for a few months, he made some graphics about his impressions, artistic impressions of the fall of Warsaw Ghetto, as he observed it from so-called Aryan side. These are very interesting images. So everybody is welcome. It will be at 6 p.m. in the main building. With that, I would like to maybe ask Glenn Diner to follow up the other things.
Thank you so much. I really want to begin by thanking Monica and JICH for hosting us. It's really been extraordinary, the work that goes into this, and all the different moving parts. So really, Monica, thank you so much. And to Stephen, the Yale Fortunow Archive, and Shai, fortunately couldn't be here, from the Fish Center at Yeshiva University. This is the ultimate bridge building, is between organizations and between all of us, between people. I'd like to go way back. It seems like ages ago, but it was only a couple of days ago that Sam Casso gave his opening keynote address. And something he said really struck me, that some of these things just stay with you. He said, only Ringelblum could have created this Oneg Shabbos archive, and he mentioned a couple of other very, talented, productive historians, but he said it could only be Ringelblum, because Ringelblum understood the importance of people and networks and institutions, and only he could pull this off. I think that should be a model for all of us as scholars. It's so easy to just become secluded and just focus on your own work. And it's, when you get into that hole, especially as a graduate student, it's very hard to get out of it and start forging those relationships, but those relationships are really what it's all about. I've just learned so much in the past couple of days, even about my own topic, just by sharing knowledge and sharing experiences and information. So I hope that's something that we can all carry with us, and these friendships and relationships will really last forever. I don't want to go through the whole conference. I know you're supposed to do that in closing remarks, but I'm tired. And I don't want to go on too long. What I will say, though, is there's a metaphor in there somewhere about that very first session we had, where we have seances and being visited by demons, and these supposedly departed Hasidic groups which revive again. There's a metaphor there. I think communing with the dead is something that historians do too, and we're constantly almost forming relationships with people long departed and long deceased. And so if we go back to that very first session, that was very fitting, especially in a place like Warsaw, where there was so much life and, of course, so much death, to really feel like these people aren't forgotten. These souls, especially the ones who really made a difference, are not forgotten. They're constantly being re-examined and met again and again, and then conveyed to our students and our readers. So that communion with the dead is a pretty good metaphor for what we're doing, because the dead become alive as we encounter them again and again. We ran the gamut in this conference. Bridging Divides is a very wide-ranging topic, and I think that's what made it work. Because you can look at all these different kinds of bridges between the secular and the religious worlds, between different genders, between Poles and Jews, and this very difficult, still difficult history that we have to try to continue to work through. All of this, it only works, if we're constantly trying to build those bridges, no matter how difficult the circumstances become and how polarized things become. And I think some of you who have CNN have been watching what's going on in the United States right now. These are very difficult, isolating times, only made worse by Corona, and yet we're all here and we're all together. And that's just so important, and not to be taken for granted. One thing I did want to do, which is, I hope not too onerous, is I wanted to give our respondents a chance to say something about their own research. And if it links in with the Bridging Divides theme, that would be fantastic, but it doesn't have to. But I thought maybe it would be nice if each of us could give just a few minutes about the projects that we're working on. And before we do that, I also wanted to make an announcement about plans for publication. We would welcome your article versions of your presentations on during this conference, article versions for a special issue of Kvartalnik, of Jewish History Quarterly. And we'll be in contact by email. And to bridge back all the way to our wonderful closing keynote about Beis Yaakov reviving in the post-war period, all of this would be such a great thing to include in a special issue. And if it's too much, we'll make it a double issue. We can work with it. But please, we'll all be in contact afterwards. So just something to bear in mind. As Monica said, we're also thinking about possible future conferences or workshops. Maybe something in smaller groups. We don't have to be so ambitious every time. So that's something to continue to think about as well. In any case, is it okay if we start with you, Anna? So Anna Chichopek-Gadraj is, first of all, a professor at Arizona State University, who is my collaborator, my partner in crime. We just wrote a chapter in a volume on pogroms in Jewish history, and I can't tell you how wonderful it's been collaborating with Anna. Those of you who know Anna will probably understand. And Anna's going to tell us a little bit about her new project. So please, maybe.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Glenn, Kasia, Monica, and Żich in general. Glenn, special thanks to you. You are the master of bridging the divide, and really, this conference is definitely a result of that mastery. I'm a social historian, or rather a historian of Polish-Jewish relations in post-war period after the Holocaust in both Poland and diaspora. And I myself started about 20-something years ago, I grew up in a non-Jewish background, fell in love with Jewish history in high school. But from the start, what really drove me, I think, was my deep, profound sense of guilt and shame about the history, wartime history and post-war history here in Poland, more specifically in Krakow, also in the village where my father is from, hearing the stories from that place. So from the beginning, I think, my scholarship, my thinking about post-war history and especially pogroms and anti-Jewish violence was a very emotional and very personal journey. And I think I represent a cohort of those of us who came of age in 1990s. We sort of try to address these very difficult issues. And my first work on pogrom in Krakow in 1945, which by the way was published here under directorship of Felix Tych at Jewish Historical Institute, was a product of that. But Glenn asked me to speak about my new research, and my new research, I think, also is a product of broader trends in scholarship, and that is a new focus on migrations, on transnational, global aspects of Polish Jewish history, family stories. My new research focuses on migratory experiences of both ethnic Polish Catholic, mainly Catholic Jewish families and Polish Jewish families after the Holocaust. And with that, I hope to make a few contributions. First of all, I hope to go beyond the linear narrative of post-war history from Poland to DP camps to the United States. That's kind of the paradigm in that scholarship. It's true that most refugees, displaced persons from Poland did follow this path, but thousands did not. And I think the exclusive focus on DP camps to the United States very much obscures that other narrative that actually Litka showed yesterday with her map, right? It was not a journey from A to B, it was a journey through many, many points. Second, I hope to focus on the journey itself, on the movement after the war. Because of course, most displaced persons, most survivors did not have a plan in place, right? I'm going to be here and then I will be in the United States. Far from it. There was a lot of impermanence of life in transit. And it's true that the United States was the final destination for many migrants. But that it's very teleological thinking, right? If circumstances changed ever so slightly, many of these survivors could have ended up in France, Argentina, England, and other places. And finally, I think for this conference, for our conversations, I try to integrate both ethnic Polish, Catholic and Polish Jewish families in the study. These histories are typically told in separation, right? They are, and I think this academic separation, scholarly separation of ethnic Polish and Polish Jewish history very much mirrors the actual distancing between the two communities. Because it's true that after the Second World War in displacement, despite shared citizenship, despite shared cultural or linguistic background, the two communities seemed to have rarely interacted, right? They lived in separation. Interviews, testimonies, memoirs suggest that and show that. But I also think that there is something going on that Samuel Casso brought up in his initial keynote, and that is some forgetting is going on. Because actually, when you look closely into the sources, you see multiple moments of interaction, intersection, intermingling in post-war displacement. After all, they traveled the same routes, they stayed in the same DP camps, military service camps, same cities, etc. Those moments, and this is coming back to Litka's point yesterday, these moments of interactions, I think, are best illuminated by through oral history, through oral testimonies. And I look at the displacement really through the prism of individual experience, daily individual experience of migrants, refugees. In that, I cannot agree more with Peter Gatrell, the foremost scholar of Refugedom, who forcefully argued that we need to bring voices of refugees, migrants, DPs into the very center of our analysis. And to quote him, to relocate refugees to the very center of historical inquiry by recovering and analyzing their voices. And just the last thing I want to say to this. Oral history, in particular case of our history here, Polish-Jewish history, is in a sense, a traumatic and therapeutic experience at the same time. And this is again coming back to Litka's presentations yesterday. Through my own interviews with survivors, with Jewish survivors, I came to realize that I brought Poland with me to those interviews. I came as a representative of Poland with all its bad and its good. And it was a chance for survivors to cope with the memory, often very painful, cope with the harm and the hurt and the anger. And conversation with me was also a chance to kind of show anti-Semitism, kind of make me feel that as well, that hurt with them. So perhaps oral histories in Polish-Jewish field can become a tool to bridge those divides, one of many tools that we have to work through trauma, to work through shame and guilt on my part, and hurt and harm and anger on part of survivors. So thank you very much.
That was wonderful, but now you made us all really nervous because we're not quite as prepared. That was fantastic and so timely with the new refugee crisis that we're all in the midst of right now. So thank you so much.
I do feel really bad now.
No.
That was fantastic and extremely touching and really beautiful. So I'll just say thank you for being here and thank you for coming and thank you, Glenn, and the rest of the academic committee for your amazing work and for working with us. It was fantastic and I'm so glad this conference worked out the way it did. The papers were all fascinating and so diverse and so different. At the same time, they worked so beautifully together. And I think we all learned so much from each other as well. So this truly was a bridging experience. Well, anyway. Bridging the divide. I didn't say the divide as if there was a divide, but a bridge, yes, to omit the word divides, yes, but bridging experience, it was great. So Glenn asked us to talk about a bit about projects, and I've already told most of you about my project like a lot of times, so I'll be very brief. My project is actually not about bridging divides, it's about divides which remain, and so it's quite contrary, but maybe it does work in that context as well. I work on memories and on emotions which follow people. So in that sense, it's about migrations too, about trans-territorial, cross-border emotions and the way in which people after the war rely on cross-border networks of information. And the particular emotion which I'm looking at and action following it is revenge, so zemsta in Polish. So the search for justice, however difficult, impossible it is to achieve after the war, among Polish Jewish Holocaust survivors. And this research came out really from this realization that while there's a lot of work now on post-war turmoil and purges and extralegal purges and legal search for justice as well in post-war Europe, Polish Jewish Holocaust survivors are written out of that story. And this is for many levels, for many reasons, fully understandable. They are often considered to be physically and emotionally unable to get revenge. This is also often because people rely on post-war testimonies, as in oral histories, submitted many years after the war, where physical revenge is replaced by displaced revenge, so by the concept of surviving, having children, giving testimony as revenge. And it's often assumed that this is the only feeling that those people had in 1945 or 46. And also, of course, of the communal view of revenge as immoral, pathological, atavistic impulse. And this is also how the post-war Polish Jewish community saw it as a communal stance. But what I'm trying to show instead is that people did attempt to carry out revenge, however they could do it, both either physically or by handing someone over the security apparatus. And that they didn't only do it in Poland, but they also attempted to do it as they left Poland. So I'm focusing on space. I'm looking at it through the concept of space, through the concept of affective spaces, so spaces filled with emotions, but also spaces filled on like purely physical level. So I'm trying to see what options of revenge people had in particular places. I'm starting with Poland and looking at survivors returning to villages. Then I'm looking at an urban space, which is more often a site of collective revenge and collective violence. I'm looking at Polish courts, and then afterwards, after migration, I'm looking at displaced persons camps. I'm looking at the civic court by the Central Committee of Jews in Poland as a place where people tried to get revenge just before they left Poland. And then I look at gossips and rumors which followed them as they left Poland, as they settled in new spaces, and different ways of communal dealing with the past in those new places, among others, mainly in South America. So that's my project. There isn't many bridging divides. It's quite negative in that sense. But it is in a way that it does show people on the move, and it does show this trans-territorial aspect of the Polish Jewish community after the war. But yes, what I'd really like to say again is thank you for being here. And I'm really proud of this conference and how wonderfully it worked out.
So I guess it's my turn now. My new project is really a book that's just about finished on Hasidism in really the interwar and wartime Holocaust period. My larger question is how do we integrate Hasidism, this traditionalist movement, into the story of modern Polish Jewry? You know, it's usually treated separately or really written out of the history. You know, we assume the tradition was in decline. That fits our secularization narrative pretty well, right? Secularization is supposed to be this movement from tradition to secularism, and yet we have scholars in this room who can very well attest to the vitality. You know, Naomi Simon's work on Beis Yaakov, and Tzipora's work, which we're continuing to learn about, and Daniel Reiser's work in the Piaseczner Rebbe. These figures and communities are extremely vital at a time when they're not supposed to be. You know, it's supposed to be a time where Hasidism had declined, stagnated maybe, and yet we're finding it just continuing to grow and be vital precisely at the point where it's not supposed to be doing so. In my own work, I've been focusing on the educational institutions, and I find in the wake of World War I, there's an actual pedagogical explosion, institutionally speaking, an explosion of new construction of yeshivas and refurbishing of the cheder, the traditional elementary school. The Hasidic yeshiva really is practically invented in this period, although there are a couple before the war. And suddenly Hasidism becomes a much more scholarly and intellectualist endeavor. And I think that's probably what powered it through the trauma of the Holocaust. The problem is, how do we explain this? And how do we get excited about Hasidism without romanticizing Hasidism? That's always the danger. You know, on the one hand, we have social historians who tend to be cynical about just about everything, and really, you know, you're not allowed to express too much excitement over religious movements because it means you've really gone over to the other side. You know, it's a very. Or you're outdated, yeah. Or maybe you had some sort of religious awakening yourself. And I'm not going to say which I'm guilty of, but I would like to find a language to speak about Hasidism as a vital phenomenon in modernity without any apologetics or on the other side, without any romanticizing. One thinker that really has struck me is Stuart Hall, because he looks at other colonized and diaspora groups and notices that really at a time when their culture is being suppressed by the dominant culture, which considers itself to be culture with a capital C, right? Universal, all-embracing. In this case, we could speak of Polish Catholic culture, you know, in the interwar period, as Poland becomes a nation state. That's precisely when these diaspora and colonized groups wake up and start revitalizing their traditions and create what he calls cultures of resistance. And I found that to be very useful. Problem is, you have lots of secularist Jewish movements that are also emerging at this time. If we're going to look at it, though, through Hasidic eyes, these secularist Jewish movements like Zionism and socialism, the very movements that have been practically the exclusive focus of modern Jewish historians, they looked like collaborators. They looked like assimilationists. They looked like they were being untrue to the authentic, essential Jewish Torah culture. Whether you agree with that statement or not is not important. The point is, the people who I'm studying felt this way very strongly, that only they, you know, traditionalists, we'll call them, were being true to the authentic Jewish culture, and only they had the recipe for Jewish survival in modernity. And they make a pretty good case sometimes. You know, they form these subcultures, and Stuart Hall uses this word pretty consistently. They form these subcultures that are extremely vital, extremely rooted in traditions, but also very much growing and evolving and paradoxically open to external influences that they can use. You know, I think Beis Yaakov is a great example of this, right? So in a way, you know, to call it reactionary is getting it completely wrong, in my opinion. Yes, they can be reactionary for sure, and they are responding to a crisis, no doubt, but the creativity there is something that I find so compelling, you know, the constant reinventing. And so that's the story that I'm really telling about Hasidism and specific dynasties, Bobov, Ger, Alexander, Sochashev, Belz to a certain extent. You know, these are the dynasties that emerge, come into their own in a lot of ways in this period, and have that velocity, that momentum to really survive the most traumatic event in Jewish history, the Holocaust. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Is this on? Yeah, it's on. So first of all, looking at this is a concluding panel, and you are still here, so that's the best proof that this was really a great conference. So my first big congratulations go to Kasia and Glenn, who have done a tremendous job in bringing people together whose research resonates with each other. So it's bridging the work of individual young scholars to take the gamble to make it a junior conference. I mean, the speakers were all comparatively junior scholars, which is a brilliant idea. And I'm so impressed by all your work, and I wish I would have been half as good as you when I was at your stage. So congratulations all around. Also, thanks to Gilles to take the gamble of a face-to-face conference in a period when it was not sure how this would all play out. And this is my first face-to-face conference. I don't know about you, but I understand again how important it is to engage with each other face to face and not via Zoom. It is a different quality. The many variations of communications we have, listening to papers, commenting, asking questions, seeing reactions to papers, falling asleep, no, not falling asleep, having conversations over coffee, all that is tremendously important for academic creativity, and I really congratulate the organizers and the GIR for having taken the risk of doing that. So very many thanks. I'm with Anthony Polonsky. I'm co-chair of Polin, Studies in Polish Jewry. So before I talk about what my own research is, I would like to emphasize how important this type of gathering is for platforms such as Polin. I mean, the next volumes, I would just give you the topics of the next volumes, which not those which are already finished, but those which lie ahead. So those which are finished are Childhood in Eastern Europe, co-edited with Natalia Lekshun, and then Poles, Jews, and the Land of Israel, also finished together with Scott Ury and Israel Bartal. Then a volume on Polish Jewish and German Jewish cultures, something which falls to the wayside a lot, which is a tremendously interesting field, together with Katrin Steffen. And the following volume, and now we are already looking at the end of the decade, a volume on the history of gender and the body in Eastern European Jewish history, with Elisa Ben-Porat as co-editor. And then the next volume, Poles and Jews in the Prism of Culture. So looking at literature, film, theater, fine arts. Obviously the collections of GIR will be very important. And the last volume, which we have actually already envisaged, is about the Holocaust, although there the thematic range is not yet established. Over the past 3 days, I had so many occasions to talk with some of you, with many of you, about these volumes which lie ahead, and I so much look forward to working with as many with you as possible, because this field is extremely alive and kicking, and that's extremely rewarding, and this is really fantastic. Okay, Glenn had the idea that I say something because I published this volume together with Jerzy Tomaszewski, who is no longer with us, sources on the history of Jewish self-government in the Polish lands. And this has been a pleasure and the bane of my past years to put together 720 pages about the history of Jewish communities, Jewish communal self-government in the Polish lands. And it is a wonderful illustration of what's the title? Ruptures and Continuity. So the volume is purely chronological, starts in the Middle Ages. The first story, and we have one co-author here with us, Piotr Kędziorek, who worked on the interwar period. It starts with the Middle Ages. The first source is from 1025, and it walks chronologically through generation and generation and generation. The last source is of 2010, and there are obviously some themes, and I'm not going into the details now. I mean, communal organization, rabbinical education, relationships between authorities and Jewish communities, you name it, everything is in there. Religion, obviously, organization of religious communities, charities. And the Machloikes, for Ellison there's a lot in there, because obviously the Machloikes around the cemetery play a role in throughout these centuries. But there's one exception to this chronological order, and that's the period of the German occupation in Eastern Europe. And we have a chapter on the period of the German occupation, because obviously, as we have learned from Sam Kassau and many others, the institutions which Jewish communities or Jews under siege developed were grounded in the history of Jewish self-government. And for example, the people who were forced to join Judenräte were very often people who had communal responsibilities before the war. So there are many resonances, but in order to avoid the impression that what happens between 1939 and 1944, 45, in somewhat is a continuity, we edit it at the end as an epilogue. So this is really taken out of the continuity because this is the rupture, obviously. We have to take into consideration, and that was the outcome of a workshop we organized at the University of Warsaw, where this project started too many years ago. Okay, so lots of resonances, and my congratulations to Kasia and Glenn to have come with a theme which works on so many levels. I could start now to go through every single panel because it has worked so well. What I found impressive is how because we have already now such a considerable, what you call in Polish, dorobek naukowy, we have learned so much about the history of the Holocaust that we heard several papers which were actively engaging to integrate the pre-war period and the Holocaust, but also the Holocaust and the post-war period, because we have now so much to work with. And I found this one example for how this works particularly well. Okay, three just to complete my round here of my own research. I'm completing a volume on the history of Jewish intercession, in Hebrew known as Stadlanut, Yiddish Stadlones. Right now I sit in the Biblioteka Narodowa looking at the abolition of torture as the outcome of non-Jewish Jewish cooperation to abolish torture as a means in court cases. I developed a project, and I had a number of very productive communications here during my stay about radical anti-Jewish positions in Poland since 1800. So not the usual stereotypes, etc., but really radical, vicious, exclusionary views of the Jews, which is, I think, a continuous thread in Polish positions towards the Jews in these countries, in these lands, which we need to understand better, because I think there is a long history here where we fail to understand the continuities. And finally, as a Ciekawostka, I had spoke about that with Eli Mosesson, a project on matted hair. The matting of hair has been a part of individual and communal culture in Eastern Europe, but I don't go into the details of that. So again, my congratulations. Oh no, I have one criticism of the conference. Oh, I almost forgot. I mean, there was actually no. It was very good. It was just right. It depends on how much you put on your plate, Monica. I'm joking. No, I mean, there is a dorobek naukowy about the institution itself. There's Gabriel Finder, there's Laura Jokusz, there's Stefan Stach. There are many people who have worked about post-war Madej Hayadut Jewish studies in Poland, and also about Zich. And the political implications on engaging with the Jewish present and the Jewish past. And I think it would have been good to include this as well in a perspective which would resonate with the other perspectives, but that is just a small observation. Next time, exactly. So congratulations. Thank you.
So I ask with trepidation, does anybody have any questions they would like to pose? Anyone? Or a comment, even better. Yes, Daniel.
The problem is that I'm Galicianer. All sessions start early when I arrive. So I would just like to say something that I think has implications to all the young scholars here. I deal with Hasidic philosophy, mostly via unknown manuscripts in Poland. Now, when I started more than 20 years ago in university, and philosophy is very different than history. A professor caught me, in the hall and told me, there's nothing to write about. go to history. There they go to archives, they find new things. You know, we're not Hinduism. It's a small field. Judaism. How many philosophers? What would you write about? Maimonides? Everyone wrote about Maimonides. Are you going to write about Mendelssohn? Everyone wrote about Mendelssohn. Are you going to write about Hasidism? Everyone is writing about Hasidism. You're in the wrong field. Well, I have to say, he was wrong. And I think the session that I was chairing, and also other sessions, proved to us that we are just in the beginning. People brought here unknown material, unknown manuscripts, if it's mysticism, if it's magic, if it's Hasidism, and all other fields, which I'm not acquainted with. And my last book that I published was 200 unknown Hasidic Yiddish sermons of the Ger Rebbe, and he was Sfas Emes. He lived here in Warsaw, not in Ger. And the manuscript was written in 1987, and I was told, it's lost. It's lost. Obviously, World War I, World War II, it did not, most chances it was burned and in ashes forever. Well, it took me a couple of years and I traced it and then published it. But I'm saying, just yesterday, I was sitting here in the archives. Just before the concert, we had an hour. And the department, Michał from the department of the Zich archives said that the Ringenblum archive is just part of many archives we have. We have 7,900 testimonies taken after the war. I don't remember exactly, roughly, the numbers. So I looked at a testimony of a young child from Łódź, Lodz, from the ghetto, given it after the war, 1945, when she's 12 years old. And she says how much, and most of them are in Polish or Yiddish, how important it was for them in the ghetto to maintain, to keep Yom Kippur. So I'm saying, and these were never read and searched, and it's just across the door. There's lots of material. If you're dealing with religious life in the time of the war, or before the war, or after the war, there's lots of material. We're just in the beginning. You proved that we're just in the beginning, and I hope that I wish you all to have lots of success, paving your own path, finding new materials, writing about new topics, and don't let anyone despair you by saying there's nothing new to write about. You proved the opposite. Thank you.
I think many of us who've done research in Poland have had the experience of people saying, it's not here, it doesn't exist. They describe the flames that were, the burning of the Warsaw Ghetto, everything's gone. And then you find there's so much that survived. You've got to be persistent. So thank you, Daniel, for that. Really, that's absolutely so true. Any other further questions, comments? Rabbi, please.
Daniel. So I was really honored to be here and to learn so much. While I am pursuing a master's degree at Yeshiva University, to use a metaphor or allegory from my own lecture of Agnon, I'm really more of a guest for the night in the world of academia. I deal in the larger community as a rabbi, as an educator, and I really want to emphasize how important it is to find ways. I mean, it's almost, we heard it in the session about the museums. The gentleman from YIVO spoke about the ignorance that exists in the United States about so much Jewish history, and you're the gatekeepers to that. And spread your wings wide, translate, if your scholarly material, make connections. I started to write about Agnon in a publication. It's like a throwaway newspaper every week called the Jewish Journal. It's not an academic journal, but it brings this material to a larger public and it inspires them to learn more. In Israel, around the world here, I think it's just really important. I'd be very happy and honored to serve as that bridge to help get your material out to the larger public because it's so important. The material, I've been taking notes for 3 days about, you've given me 30 sermons and adult education classes to present to my community, and I just hope you continue to do more. I'd be honored to continue to be part of it in any way I can, and I want to thank all of you. Thank you.
I don't know, how do we put, we have one more.
So I wasn't here for the whole conference, but there's something about the spirit of this conference, even coming in, flying in the last minute, that I feel. And I just think that there's certain people who have just a big soul, and they're able to create something like this. And there are many people who are part of that, but I really think that this comes from the generous spirit of Glenn Diner. So this is just an opportunity to say that.
I have an idea how to close the conference.
Okay, please. Now now that you've embarrassed me completely.
Yeah, because
close
the
the
discussion, Glenn is telling me, so we should close the conference, and I ask, how do we close the conference? But then I had an idea, because, since we have the rabbis here, so maybe Rabbi, come here, please. Come. Yes, you. Come, Rabbi, here. Do you know the so-called threefold blessing? Do you know the threefold blessing? The Sephardic. That's why we have the bridging experience. So
Me to pronounce the priestly blessing.
for us to let us go in peace, that people are traveling abroad and everywhere.
Okay, so I'll chant
Shall
it in
we?
the Sephardic tune, and then I'll translate it.
We should stand, or I don't know.
You can sit. Okay.
We sit? Okay. Whatever.
Okay.
Whoever.
Thank you. יברכך אדוני וישמרך, יאר אדוני פניו אליך ויחונך, יישא אדוני פניו אליך וישם לך שלום, ושמו את שמי בני ישראל ואני אברכם. May God bless you and watch over you. May the Lord, God of Israel and of all of humanity, cause his light and spirit to shine upon you and be good to you. And may the Lord, God of all of humanity, bless everyone here with safe travels and with peace, peace in our hearts, peace in our communities, peace in our homes. Shalom. Amen.
Amen. Selah.
Amen.
Yeah. This is a good finishing of the conference.